everybody. This is Dr. Osborne. Welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Tonight, we've got a great show for you. We're going to be talking about the theme of the week. For those of you who have somebody that you love in your life, we're going to be talking about love. We're going to be talking about the importance of love in your care. This is probably oftentimes one of the most overlooked components of recovery, especially those of you struggling with chronic illness, chronic autoimmune disease, is love. And that, some people will say, well, you're talking about others loving you, or are you talking about you loving yourself? And what I have seen is most predictably is this: self-love. So tonight we're going to be dialing in and diving into self-love. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. Let me know where you're watching from. Tell me where you're tuning in from in the world. That feeds me. I'd like to know how far we're reaching. Remember, our goal is to save 100 million lives. So help me know where you're from. And if you've got questions and you want to ask them, the earlier you can get them in, the better. We'll do our best to try to get those questions answered in tonight's live show. So let's dive in. Self-love. There's really what I like to categorize as five kind of major pieces of self-love. Number one is paying attention to yourself. So we'll dive into this in just a minute, but I want to kind of get through these. So paying attention to yourself, or being aware, being self-aware about how you interact in your environment and how you feel in your environment. Not leaving yourself as an afterthought. So you should not be your own afterthought. And this is oftentimes, those of you who are moms, 99% of the time, I'm going to put a little star by this one, because most of you moms are guilty of this component of being an afterthought for yourself and your contentions to try to take care of everyone else. So boundaries is another one that we see very commonly. Boundaries, not setting them clearly, not having adequate boundaries, and that could be in relationships, that could be in a number of different things, boundaries for self-care. So very, very important, again, setting boundaries. And then surrounding yourself with the right people. So this goes back to what I was talking about here, surrounding yourself with others who are good for you. Very important to not have people around you who are pulling you down. Short story. I learned from one of my mentors very early on in life that people are a lot like crabs. Well, not all people, but many people are like crabs. When they see you get ahead, when they see you advance, when they see your health improving, just like crabs in the bucket. If you've ever been crabbing, when I was a kid, we used to crabbing off the pier in Galveston. And so as we were holding these, we'd tie a rope to a chicken leg, and you'd put it in the water, and the crabs would bite on it, and you'd lift the crab and you'd put it in your bucket. And, over a couple of hours, you'd have 15, 20 crabs in that bucket. And what would happen always is that one of those crabs would start trying to make its way to the top, right? Try to start crawling out of the bucket, so to speak. And what would happen every time, you never had to put a lid on your crab bucket, because all the other crabs would see the one crab making it, breaking for the top, and they would all do their best to keep that crab pulled down and pulled in. And you probably have people in your life that are those proverbial crabs, right? The crabs in the bucket. So again, thinking about who those are and making sure that you're not surrounding yourself by the big crabs, right? And then number 5 on this list is the power of forgiving yourself, or self-forgiveness. So we're going to go through these tonight because in honor of Valentine's Day, many of you getting ready to take care of others, getting ready to celebrate love as a whole. I think the most important love we can celebrate is being in love with ourselves, because it's very, very, philosophically speaking, it's hard to know how to love someone else when you don't know how to love yourself first. Self-love is not selfish. Self-love is the number one most important priority for you to take care of yourself. So these 5 things: paying attention to yourself, don't be your own afterthought, establishing boundaries for what you will do, surrounding yourself with others who are good for you, not crabs, and then the power of self-forgiveness, all very important for tonight's theme. So I'd like to just poll the audience here. How many of you in the audience have failed? And let's just kind of, if you failed at one of these, just type that number in. if you failed at one of these areas. And by addressing that area, had a profound shift in health improvements. So if you noticed a profound shift in your health improvements by addressing one of these, just type that number in and let us know. Share that with the audience and share it with me. Okay, so let's talk about number one. So paying attention to yourself. What does this really mean? This is, you hear this word a lot, mindfulness. Mindfulness, we could put one in and the L in there, we could put a dash in there. Mindfulness is just being aware of what's going on around you and what's going on with you in the moment. And a lot of people are so preoccupied with worrying about the future or thinking about the past that there's no mindfulness of the present. And so when you're doing something like eating, for example, and you're not in that moment, then you're not aware of how that food might affect the way that you feel, might affect the way that you think. When you're in a conversation with somebody, you're not maybe fully aware, in tune with the way that conversation is going and how it's making you feel. So being mindfulness about what you're eating, right, is one aspect. About what you're thinking is another aspect. Generally speaking, what you're doing, right? We just put that word here. Mindfulness about what you're doing helps you to get feedback from your body. Remember, the feedback from your body is the mindfulness. It is the being aware. It is the first form of self-love, is paying attention to how the environment around you is impacting you in a good or a bad way, and try to move yourself in a good direction instead of keeping yourself in a place that has the potential to deteriorate your health. I've seen this happen for so many people. I see it happen in their relationships where they're not mindfulness of how another person drives them into an anxiety or drives them into a state of fight or flight. And so they stay there in that relationship that may not be the best relationship. Again, whether that relationship is with with a friend or whether that relationship is with a spouse. And this is not me telling all of you go get divorced. This is just me saying be mindful of your relationships and the things around you so that you can maximize that self-love and express it fully and feel good about expressing it and not feeling bad about it. So your self-care should come first. So number two, don't be an afterthought. Don't be your own afterthought. So this is self-care. What do I mean by self-care? A lot of you think that it's noble, somehow noble, to sacrifice your own health in your endeavor to take care of those around you. And I get it, especially from moms. Moms are generally not self-serving and self-sacrificing. They'll drive themselves into the ground to take care of their kids. And then what ends up happening, and I want you to think about this really carefully if you're a mom and you're doing this, is when you self-sacrifice, so when you offer yourself up, what you're really doing is you're teaching your children poor self-love techniques. They remember that how children learn. Most children are especially young children, between the ages of infancy and somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 years of age, they're like soaking up information intuitively from the environment. They have different brainwave states where they can take in vast quantities of information and intuitively process it. Their brains work differently. And so kids do learn by watching you do. And so if you are here self-sacrificing, what you're actually doing subconsciously is teaching your children that it's okay to damage yourself and sacrifice yourself for the love of someone else. It's the perfect way to establish in their mind a pattern of creating a relationship, with a boyfriend, with a girlfriend, a potential future spouse, etc., that allows them to put themselves in harm's way in the name of sacrifice. So you've got to keep that in mind, because this is something as our culture and our society over the last many years, many decades, it's oftentimes thought that if you take care of yourself first, that you're somehow selfish. But I would argue that if you don't take care of yourself first, you're teaching those around you self-sacrifice, which is the opposite of love, right? The opposite of love is damaging yourself to take care of another. Now, it's another matter altogether if you're taking care of another and you're not damaging yourself. This is not me saying don't help take care of others. This is just me saying, don't put yourself last. You've all heard the old cliche, put your mask on first when you're in the airplane, like put your mask on so that you can continue to function, so that then you could help others. Well, it's no different at home. And if your mask isn't on, and what should your mask be? So if we're talking about self-care, what does that really look like for you in a day? Self-care, what should we prioritize? What should be the primary, if you will? Well, number one is your food. Number two is your exercise. Number three should be your sleep. And number four really should be your stress management, like how you're dealing and coping with stress and how much you put on your plate. So like all these things you will lead, especially if you're a mom, you will lead by example, right? And so doing these things first, what happens for a lot of people when they develop chronic illness is these things are the first to go. And when they go, so too does your health. Your health goes along with it. And so food, exercise, sleep, and stress management are critical. So not only should you prioritize these things, and you should prioritize them the same way. Look, again, I keep going back to moms and kids because that's the commonality, but even this is true for dads, right? You should prioritize the things in your life that matter the most to keeping you healthy, so that one, you can set the example, two, that you're taking care of yourself, you're loving yourself, but three, when you're healthy, you can take care of others better. And so if you're not healthy, again, the aspect is how well are you actually going to be able to take care of others' needs if you can't take care of your own? So this is a very, very important part. Your care should not be the afterthought. It certainly should not be the afterthought after you're taking care of others, and then you don't even get to these things. So like if you are spending most of your day taking care of somebody else and then you don't even get to, so instead of having time to prep your food, you're driving through McDonald's. Instead of exercising, you're just not doing it. Instead of sleeping, you're going to bed at 1 a.m. and getting by on 5 hours instead of the necessary quantity. And all these three things, when you fail these three, when these three go, remember what that does. These three compile and they create chemical, physical, and emotional stressors that then you have to deal with. Because again, those stressors destroy your health. And then you're not taking care of those around you very well when you're not healthy yourself. So again, you should not be the afterthought. Let's talk next a little bit about boundaries. So healthy boundaries, learning how to say no. This kind of goes hand in hand with this one right here, because learning to say no is one of the most important things that you can do. And again, I'm going to keep picking on moms tonight. Moms are the worst at this because they always want to take on more because they want to be helpful, right? But learning when to say no and learning how to say no and learning what to say no to are very, very important. You can't take on more than what you can take on. And especially, again, going back to the theme of this show is self-love for chronic illness. So if you're struggling with chronic illness and you can't learn to say no, then what you're actually doing is you're taking on other people's problems, other people's busy work, other people's things that you don't already have time to do these things for yourself, but now you're taking on more because you don't know how to say no. Because a lot of people in today's society, again, this is a social kind of pressure thing, is that they feel guilty if they do say no. There's some type of, many of you are kind of honed in to not saying no because you have a sense of guilt if you do say no. So you have to learn what's reasonable, what is a reasonable expectation of yourself and what you're reasonably capable of achieving over the course of a day without self-sacrificing yourself to such a great degree that your health deteriorates. So part of that is learning how to say no. So where do we draw some of the boundaries? We draw boundaries at work. We draw boundaries at school. If you're going to school, we also draw boundaries at home. Okay, those are kind of the primary areas for most people where you really want to draw boundaries around it. And you draw boundaries, especially, I say at home, but also with secondary family, because this boundary might be another family member who's not part of your, not part of your prime unit, not part of your at-home family, but maybe a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, something along those lines. And so you're being drug into doing things that maybe you just don't have time to do, but you feel guilty by saying no. So again, analyzing these things and honoring yourself to say, look, if I don't have time already to take care of these needs, but now I'm going to take care of all of these needs, all I'm really going to do is further deteriorate my own health. So being realistic about it, because if you're not, again, what's going to end up happening is very, very predictable. The chronic illness will not go away because your body's not going to respond to chronic levels of stress because you don't have clear boundaries set up in your relationships and in what you're doing in this world. So it's very, very important. Now, let's talk about number 4, surrounding yourselves with others who are good for you. I like to use the term tribe. Build your tribe of people like you, not diatribe, not people who are going to bring you down, talk negative or derogatory to you. And we all have that. Like we all have the crabs in the bucket. We all have the crabs in our life, but we also all have people that we love and care about, but we love them, but we don't necessarily like them. And so sometimes it's hard to draw that line. And many of you struggle with drawing that line in the sand and saying, look, yeah, I love you. I care about you, but I don't necessarily want to be around you. So in those types of scenarios, sometimes you have to make decisions about not surrounding yourself, even though they may be family, they may not be what's best for you when you're trying to overcome a chronic illness. Now, it's another thing, I missed an I. I did. It's another thing if you're healthy and you're going to be around, let's say your aunt or your uncle or somebody in your family, and you don't get along very well, but it's a short burst. It's just like this short time frame, and you're going to probably argue with that person, but you're not going to extend the time that you spend with that individual to any great degree. That's not the same thing. I'm talking about consistently day in and day out. You want to surround others that are good for you, and you don't want to surround yourself by the negative talk, the negative emotions, because you already have enough of those. Most people do. We're our own worst critics, right? We talk negative about ourselves more than anyone else will. We don't need other people filtering in to help us. So you want to identify who those people are that are good for you and that are caring and supportive and loving of you, and you want to identify those people who are not. And then, the diatribe, you'll cut back on the dry diatribe. These are think about it as your frenemies, right? The people who, maybe you perceive to be friends, but they're really not really ever very supportive. And so sometimes this is one of the hardest things to do because, again, we go back to that sense of guilt. There's a sense of guilt where we don't want to tell some of these frenemies no, when they ask us for favors, but then when they're around us, we get all the diatribe. And so that what we have done is we built a tribe of people that pull us down consistently over time. And that's going to derail your health. It's going to derail your path back to good health. So identify who those people are and learn how to get away from them as much as possible, or spend as little amount of time with them as possible. Again, setting those clear boundaries. So there's a lot of overlap between some of these. And then the 5th one is the power of self-forgiveness. So let's dive into this a little bit. So we are always our own critic. Any of you, I guess, if I ask the question, how many of you have your own conversations in your head every day? And a lot of times that conversation is negative and has a negative impact on the way that you think and feel. So being your own critic, like you come down on yourself harder than anyone else will. And so part of this is knowing that as a human, we're all human, right? So as part of the human tribe, as a general rule of thumb, none of us are perfect, right? Human equals not perfect. And so in that regard, sometimes we're going to make mistakes. Sometimes we're going to do things incorrectly. I see this again. I'm picking on moms again, but mistakes, parental mistakes, and then they live in this constant state of hypercriticism and lack of self-forgiveness over things that their kids are doing. A close friend of mine once told me, he said that parents oftentimes take far too much credit for their children's achievements and far too much credit for their failures. And so to me, that really stuck with me because our children are they're their own people. Of course, we're there to guide them. We're there to set an example and lead by example. And if we're having adequate self-love and setting adequate example here, then they're getting the foundational learning that they need. They're going to make mistakes and they're going to do great things. And you can't always take the credit as the parent one way or the other. And so you have to learn to forgive yourself, because parenting is going to be a big mistake, or I shouldn't say a big mistake, but a lot of mistakes spaced out over a long period of time. And so if you're constantly criticizing yourself and your parenting ability, again, this is just an area where I see in my clinic, I see a lot of women really struggle with this one, this self-criticism over their parenting, over their worry over whether or not they're parenting the right way. Because again, some of this it's a grand experiment. Nobody knows the perfect way to parent a child. There are plenty of books written on the topic, but at the end of the day, every parent is different and every child is different. Even your children are all different. And you may have 3 children that require 3 different parenting styles. So you can't be too hard on yourself. So you've got to be able to forgive yourself. We're all imperfect. Your failures, big important thing here is that when you do fail, right, you forgive yourself, provided that your failures are lessons. And that really is the walk away. Some people look at their failures as the end. That's it. I failed. And then they get into this kind of failure self-criticism cycle, and it's just repetitively going over and over and over again. But failures, if we're paying attention, again, if we're following number 1, failures are lessons that we can learn from, so that hopefully we don't make the same or repetitive mistakes over and over and over again. That's when we truly fail, is when we forget to learn, or we don't learn from the mistake. So these 5 components to me are the critical pieces to loving yourself, and all healing, right? All healing. And this is 20 years of practical experience. All healing begins with bluntness. I say bluntness, we'll say blunt truth, hard truths, blunt truth. And so sometimes it's these 5 things that we lie to ourselves about. We tell ourselves we can make it by without the proper food and exercise. We'll just bulldoze it through. And we lie to ourselves and we justify those behaviors and those actions. I mean, raise your hand if you've ever justified those actions. I sure have. And we lie to ourselves about these things. And so then we set the cycle up for failure on self-love. And again, when that happens, it makes it really hard for healing to begin, or for healing to become complete. So hopefully this lesson in self-love is helpful for you this Valentine's Day, when you're getting ready to express and experience and share the holiday that has become kind of the theme of love. So hopefully this is helpful for you if you're struggling. Let's open the floor now for some questions that are coming in. Let's see, Tamara. Tamara says, Dr. Osborne, words cannot express enough gratitude for all your hard work and dedication. Thank you for making Monday evening such a great day to learn and grow forward. You're welcome, Tamara. That means a lot to me that you would share that with me and have such a kind set of words. Stacy, Dr. Osborne, I hope you're doing great. As well, I send you peace, love, happiness, and always a ton of gratitude for everything that you're doing. I'm sharing you out on my social media. Awesome, Stacy. Remember, hashtag save 100 million lives. Those of you who are watching and tuning in, I want you to make sure you're sharing this information with as many people as you feel like would be helped by it. Let's see here. Diana says, I love you too, from Brighton, Ontario. Love it, Diana. Love it. Let's see, trying to get to some questions. A lot of you just have a lot of nice things to say, and it's just making me blush a little bit. You gals are making me feel so great. Love these things. Okay. Let's see, back up just a little bit. I think I lost one there. Rafina says, my daughter says, thank you, Dr. Peter, for making this video. My mom needs it a lot. So your daughter's tuning in. See, your daughter's sucking in all that knowledge. And now she's going to become a machine of putting this in your face on a regular basis, which you need, right? We all need it. Let's see here. Lots of Missourians tonight. Let's see. Love from Minnesota. Love it. Absolutely. Wonderful lesson in life. Lots of you chiming in on where you actually struggled. A lot of fives. Power of self-forgiveness. A lot of you have overcome that. That's great. I love to hear that. Okay, let's see if we can find some questions. Man, we got a whole just plethora of kind words and nice things. Yeah, so Janelle comments, oh, wow, I never thought of that self-sacrifice for my kids, although I wonder if it can go the other way and that it teaches them that others should always sacrifice for them. Look, the reality is you don't want your kids to have the attitude or yourself to have the attitude that others should sacrifice for you. Now, if you're in a relationship and it's a loving relationship, that other person will want to sacrifice for you and you will want to sacrifice for them. So I think more than anything else, it's a mutual capacity of self-sacrifice for each other in the sake of that bond or in the sake of that love. But no partner in this world would ever want you to hurt yourself to help them if they truly love you. And that's really the whole point, is that the society that we're in today is nobody ever talks about that. Everybody always talks about, everybody always talks about helping others, but they don't talk about how helping others under the wrong light can actually be detrimental, not only to yourself, but it can be detrimental to the other person that you're actually helping. And so very, very important. Okay. May says, one of the most important lessons I've learned is you can't please everyone, and I will constantly disappoint myself if I have expectations of others. That's right. That's why we try not to be judgmental and we try not to judge, although sometimes that's hard too. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Still looking for, we've got so much nice things coming our way, but not a lot of questions. I'm really hoping this goes up later. Shared your video with several people. Okay, so Jessica says, how to deal with negative feedback from family. Getting ready to start a 10-week protocol and sharing with my family has brought lots of negative feedback. So I love it. Pseudoscientist says, quit sharing. No, not really. I mean, you know, if you have a bond and you have a relationship with your family, with family, it's all about boundaries. And so a lot of times we allow our family members to step across our boundaries because either we have that sensation of guilt or we have that sensation of fear that we can't tell them no. And so this kind of goes back to, here's the way I like to preface that conversation. When you're trying to have a conversation with family about a diet change or a healing change that you're getting ready to make in your own life, and it's going to affect how you eat, how you sleep, how you exercise, etc., it's going to affect those around you. And here's how it's going to affect them. They're not going to want to share in those things that are making you healthy if they don't want to share in them. In essence, if they're not ready to admit that they need exercise in their life, if they're not ready to admit that they need diet change in their life, then you presenting those things to them is really not them not being kind to you. It's them reflecting back what they see in the mirror. The fear of God strikes them because they know they probably should make those changes, but they're just not willing or in a place in their life where they're wanting to do that. And so they will try to pull you, the crabs in the bucket, they're going to try to pull you right back down. So you have to set up your clear boundaries. And here's the way I do that. When I'm talking with family members, I just put words in their mouth. So that, you know, the art of psychology, really just try to put words in their mouth. Something along the lines of this. So look, you know, I'm paraphrasing here. Look, Grandma, I love your cookies. They're my favorite, but you know, my health is really deteriorated and I'm really trying to do some things for me to get my health going in the right direction. And because I know that you love me, I know you want what's best for me. And right now, what's best for me is not those cookies. What's best for me is changing my diet, getting adequate sleep, getting the right level of exercise. I so much appreciate your support, Grandma, because again, I know you want what's best for me. So thank you for understanding. And thank you for not trying to tempt me. I'm just going to pre-thank you for not trying to tempt me in the future to deviate from this new path that I'm embarking on. And so again, what I just did was I just kind of paraphrased putting words in their mouth for them. You assume they love you. You assume they want what's best for you. So you put those words right into their mouth, because if they really, truly do love you, they're not going to try to deviate you from your diet, even if it means they have to, even if it means they have to kind of think about what they're doing in their own world. If you put those words in their mouth, what you're really doing is you're drawing a boundary. You're saying, you can't step over this line because you love me. That's really what you're saying. And so you're drawing a very clear line in the sand, which is a very strong boundary. And the first time they try to break it, here's the thing. If they ever try to break that boundary with you, if they ever, offer up the cookie or try to get you, just one bite, or just get you to try to deviate, then you draw a hard line in the sand. So understand what I just said was a soft line in the sand, but the hard line in the sand is, look, we already had this conversation. And the reason I had this conversation from you is because I needed your support and I didn't need your judgment. So if you really want, me to be around you, if you really want the courtesy of my time and you want us to have a relationship, then I would appreciate you honoring what I'm trying to do and quit trying to tempt me in the other direction. So that's the hard line. And if you have to do it again a third time, then you draw an even harder line. And it may mean that you avoid that person for a time until you can get established in your health. And sometimes that's hard to do when it comes to family members, especially in certain cultures, because family, there's so much guilt. There's so much psychological guilt association complexes that go on in family dynamic, and you have to learn to recognize it. And so again, that's why if you evaluate yourself along these 5 lines, you'll be so much better at recognizing what is actually a family member trying to, make you feel bad for trying to improve yourself, or what is a family member who just doesn't want to improve upon themselves. And so again, that's going to be helpful for you. Okay, let's see here. Pseudo says, I'd never turn down grandma cookies. I don't know, man. If you were gluten sensitive enough, you definitely would. How do you truly go about forgiving yourself? I can repeat the words to myself, but not really mean it. So Wanda, that's a really deep question. And I really like that question. How do you forgive yourself? I don't think it just is one day. I don't think you just say, I forgive myself. I think it's through your actions and your choices. The more you pay attention to these things, the more you actually will allow your body, your mind to offer up forgiveness. Now, again, part of forgiveness and part of forgiving yourself is recognizing your failures as lessons. And for me, that was a big breakthrough, because, prior to that, again, it's if we don't learn a lesson, then we have self-feedback into self-internal criticism. So the lesson has to be learned. So where you're struggling to forgive yourself, ask yourself, what is it that I'm trying to forgive myself from? And ask yourself, did I learn a lesson from that, or am I just saying the words? The words don't mean a whole lot. It's got to be coming from more than words. And so if there was no lesson learned, then begin the process of self-forgiveness by asking, what is the lesson? And diving into what the lesson is, and really focusing in on that lesson, and then learning it and then applying it, because it's a lot easier to forgive yourself when you don't have repetitive mistakes, right? So there are a lot of reasons why we might not be forgiving ourselves. But one of the biggest ones that I see in the psychological realm of food is people basically having that self-criticism over a binge eating session. So like they went off the deep end, they had a weak need moment and, ate a pound of cookies or ate, a vat of ice cream or whatever that might have been. And so they don't forgive themselves. They go here instead. And the reason why one of the reasons this keeps happening and they can't forgive themselves is because there wasn't a lesson in it. And so what is the lesson? If you dive off that deep end and you do that thing that is going to hurt you, that has hurt you in the past, what do they say about insanity? Repetitive behavior with the expectation of a different outcome is insanity. So, you've got to learn from the lesson, and then you've got to practice from the lesson. And again, practice doesn't mean perfect. We practice to become more perfect, but you may fail a few times before you get to a point where you're ready to give yourself that forgiveness. But asking yourself whether or not you learn the lesson can sometimes be the first step in recognizing forgiveness. All right, everyone, let's see. Let's see. Thoughts on TCM. So what do you mean by TCM? There's so many different acronyms. So spell that out for me on what you mean, May, on TCM. Yeah, I love it. Stacy says obstacles are opportunities, happiness, peace, love, compassion, and gratitude. All important. I agree. They have to be in your thoughts. The compassion, the passion, the gratitude, because oftentimes it's our internal thoughts that create and project who we are in the world. And so if our internal thoughts are self-deprecating, then it's going to create this. If our internal thoughts are more self-love oriented, it's going to create, again, it's going to create a projection, a spiritual projection of who you're capable of being. Oh, traditional Chinese medicine. So question was from May, was traditional Chinese medicine good for liver cleansing? I think was the question. So it can be. So here's the thing, May, traditional Chinese medicine, the bigger question isn't can traditional Chinese medicine help detoxify the liver? The bigger question is, why does the liver need to be detoxified? And so this comes back to behaviors. I always kind of tend to want to start with these 4 behaviors. The way the liver is detoxified is by not being overwhelmed. And so a healthy choices in these 4 categories will lead to a healthy liver outcome, where people have consistent bad choices in these 4 categories, that their liver starts to struggle. And then they have this need periodically to do a detox. And so it's kind of like, a detox is great if you're just trying to start off a massive change in life. But if you're finding yourself having to detox twice a year and using pills and using potions and using herbals and other things, including traditional Chinese medicine, then you're not having the right sets of behaviors during the course of the year, because you're not preventing the need to have to repeat that detox. Again, failures are lessons, and so learn from the lesson. If you are chronically having to detox, that's not me answering exactly the question of does traditional Chinese medicine help with liver detox. There are a number of different things in traditional Chinese medicine that can help, but your behaviors are the most important thing first, and your behavior changes have to come before you consider that detox, because what happens psychologically for most people who are embarking on a detox is what they're really doing is they're cleansing themselves today to give themselves permission tomorrow to basically detoxify themselves. So it has to start with the right self-love from the beginning before you begin any kind of detox. Okay. Freddie says, Freddie versus Jason, that's a name, right? Ice cream is love. It is in our culture, right? And I grew up just like you guys. When I was a kid, my mom would stock the freezer with Little Debbie's and, the discount bakery. I mean, that's what was in our freezer, and that's what we ate every day, like that, that and peanut butter and white bread and milk full of hormones. Like that's the kind of food that I grew up on. But I don't know that I've shared this story on a live event, but I was a chubby little kid when I was in 6th grade. I was probably about 40 pounds overweight. And, poor me, imagine a little kid like me, I was coming of age, right? 12, 13, when young boys come of age and they start to have an interest in females, right? And here I was, and nobody had an interest in me. And here I was eating Little Debbie snack cakes and Dolly Madison discount bakery products and hormone-loaded milk. And it was really around that time that I realized in sports is what saved me. I discovered basketball and I discovered running. And sports really saved me from a lifelong challenge of battling food-induced disease, illness, and obesity. But that was my first endeavor into it. And so, yeah, we all probably have a story like that where food, in this case, ice cream, somebody mentioned ice cream is love, but where for me, food was love. We grew up, and that was, if there was a problem, if somebody was sad, somebody was quick to shove a plate of some kind of food in your face and say, oh, poor you, here you go. This is the way we love. And look, even in my house today, my wife has, this wooden spoon, and she uses it to cook a lot of our meals with. And we always kind of tease her and we say, this is the magic wand of love, because the master ingredient in any meal is love. And that love of food and that love of cooking doesn't have to necessarily be detrimental. You just have to first get educated about what is in food, and then food can be love again. Remember, ultimately, if we go back in time, before processed food, before all the chemicals, before all the genetic engineering and everything else that went on, food was made from somebody's garden. Food was made from somebody's true love. They really, truly loved you, and they were caring enough about you to create something grand for you. But today it's not the same connotation, because somebody might have the same thoughts of love, but here they are, maybe they're baking up a cake, but the cake mix is full of processed corn sugar from genetically modified corn. It's full of brominated wheat flour, and then they're going to add margarine to that, and then they're going to coat it with hydrogenated vegetable oil as icing with sugar in it. That, that's not love, right? I mean, the intent is there, the intention is there, but the actual outcome is one that hurts you and doesn't help you. And we get, the same thing can happen in life when we don't learn to love ourselves. We get exposed to all these different people and to all these different things, and we get all this guilt as a result of not damaging ourselves for the sake of making somebody else's fruition of what they perceive to be love, which is feeding you with poison. So you have to call a spade, and sometimes that honesty can hurt somebody else's feeling, and you have to be willing to do that if you want to save yourself. So I know I just kind of went off on a tangent there, but food is love, and that was what somebody said. Ice cream is love, and so you're not wrong. And so we just have to define what food should be love versus what food should not be considered as love. Okay. Sandy says, Dr. Osborne, it's so hard to find your people. Most people I find are not on the same page about health. You're right. And it's just like it's hard to find your people in relationships. It's hard to find your spouse. It's just the same thing. I mean, you've probably heard the old cliche, if you have one really true good friend, then you are really a lucky person indeed. And that's true, because real true friendship comes out of this. It comes out of two people having self-love first, and then coming together and conjoining their love because they know how to properly love. And it's a really hard thing, and it's a rare thing to find in the world. And so this is, in a sense, it leads to disappointment and depression for a lot of people because they're not able to find their tribe, so to speak. I would encourage any of you looking for a tribe. I mean, first of all, this is our tribe. This is one of our tribes right here every Monday night. This is one of the things that feeds my love to help people get better, and my love to help all of you, in that expression, and all of you coming together every Monday night and answering each other's questions and communicating with each other in the feed. Like, I see that is part of our tribe. And maybe it's not a face-to-face tribe, but sometimes we have to take those relationships where we can get them. And so that's part of why I created a community here. That's part of why we created a community at Gluten Free Society. And so hopefully you'll find some tribe and not diatribe in this community. Now, outside of this community, my advice is, if you're looking for people that have the same type of mindset, start first with people who value this principle right here, this exercise. And generally, this is, my part of my core family, outside of my children and outside of my wife, are the people that I exercise with. And one of the reasons why is we go and we take it, we put all of our energy out on the floor, and we go all out together, right? We do it together. We respect each other, and we all respect it in order to exercise the way that we try to exercise. And I'm a CrossFitter, and so I love the CrossFit community because they know and understand that exercise is important, and they're not going to try to deter you from it. They also know that food and sleep are important to recover from that exercise. So this community has been, in my opinion, very, very helpful for me to find other people with again, with a like attitude. Now, that being said, you also don't, some of your tribe, you may not eat the way you do, may not exercise the way that you do, but they still have the ability to love themselves and then subsequently love you, and they still respect your choices around this area. And that's where you have to also be not non-judgmental of them. You have to respect their ability to make healthy or unhealthy decisions for themselves. Now, you can be honest with them and say, look, I care enough about you that I wish you would eat better, or I care enough about you that I wish you would exercise. You can do those types of things with your friends. But at the end of the day, we're trying to love ourselves and offer that love without judging too many people around us in a negative light, because for the same reason you don't want them to judge you, you don't also want to pass that judgment on them. That's a really fine and hard balance to try to keep. And so finding that tribe is a challenge, but finding a group of people who generally who understand the importance of exercise is one way to go about it in your community, so that you can have actual not social media relationships, but actually interpersonal relationships that can last you a lifetime. Let's see, Linda says, you said that we should be in bed and sleeping by 10 p.m. Does that mean during regular time and daylight savings time, or does it matter? So Linda, what I'm trying to do in that regard is give you kind of an idea of the time frame which is best. And if we can strive for that, then is it ideal? No, but it's that window that's been studied by researchers that says if we're asleep during this time, we're going to get the best bang for our restorative sleep buck. So ideally, when should we go to sleep? And unless you can see at night, unless you have infravision, so to speak, you should be going to bed when the sun goes down, and you should be waking when the sun comes up. That's ideal, but that's not realistic in the world that we live in today. What is realistic is 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., and that does allow you to get those 4 hours of very restorative sleep to overcome chronic illness. Yeah, I like that. Nancy says, give grandma the gluten-free cookie recipes. And that's another strategy. It's something that we did when my kids were younger. We didn't just take away food. We didn't just say, Grandma, you can't bake cookies. We said, Grandma, we don't eat gluten. And if you want, let's scroll down on the right side here, on my right. Crystal wants to know, have I done videos on heavy metals? I've done a few, nothing too super in depth. We can add that to the queue. What about loneliness, Linda? Linda says, what about loneliness? Clarify that for me, Linda. Loneliness, loneliness can be a therapeutic thing. And some people, I mean, it depends on the kind of person that you are. There's a really good book that many of you might benefit from. It's I can't remember the exact title of it, but I think it's the 4 Love Languages, or the Love Languages book. And they talk in that book about how people express and how people receive love. And some people receive love by spending quality time with others. And so loneliness for them is a lot harder than, say, somebody who receives love through gifts, or somebody who receives love through other ways. But clarify that for me, Linda, and I might be able to address it a little bit better. Let's see. How can we come out of fight or flight? I've been trying for a year. If you've been trying for a year and you haven't been successful, Anthony, then there's probably something that you're currently doing that's triggering that fight or flight. Now, for a lot of people, the food can create that trigger. Food reactions, so sensitivities or allergens. Allergens in particular, IgE responses to food, will drive up histamine, which drives up adrenaline, which drives up your fight or flight, which makes it very, very hard to ever get out of it. So if your doctor, if you're not working with a functional medicine practitioner and they haven't done some investigation as to what foods you should or shouldn't be eating, and you don't have that answer, but maybe you've followed like no grain, no pain, and the diet of no grain, no pain, then you might want to consider getting additional testing done, just asking your doctor to run additional testing to help give you better clarity. Because if you've been struggling that long, there's something else that's still triggering the fight or flight. And it might be spiritual, it might be chemical, it might be physical, it might be emotional. There are a number of things in those categories that can be triggering. Yeah, I like that. So somebody mentioned lonely, and then somebody else commented, Stacy commented back, lonely is a time of exploration to get to know yourself better and what's important to you. I couldn't agree more. You've got to be able to know what you want, what are your dreams, what are your aspirations, what things fulfill you. Again, because that helps you embark into relationships when you are lonely, is knowing yourself. That's why most of the philosophers, and again, I'm going to be cliche here, but you've all heard this. Know thyself, right? And the way that we know thyself, the way as we start is with number 1 right here, is pay attention to yourself. And part of that means you have to be lonely. Put the phone down, put the book down, put the TV remote down, and just be in your own head. One of my favorite things to get lonely, like if you really want to get lonely really quick, is to use something called a float tank. And most metropolitan areas will have float tank centers. And what this basically is you get into a big bathtub. It's a huge bathtub that's filled with about 1,000 pounds of magnesium salt. and the magnesium absorbs into the skin, but the magnesium also creates a buoyancy for your body, so your body floats. It can't sink. It's like the Dead Sea. Your body cannot sink in that tank. The water's the same temperature as your body, so you don't really feel the sensation of temperature. You're wearing blinders when you get in the tank, and you're wearing earplugs so you can't see or hear. And so again, what float tanks are also known as, they're known as sensory deprivation. So you're depriving yourself of sight, of sound, of temperature, of gravity, and all you're left with is what's in your noggin, is what's inside your head, right? And that's the ultimate way to be alone with yourself, where you're not tempted to pick up a book or the phone or whatever it might be. And so you'll spend the first 15 minutes arm wrestling your own brain, like, literally, not literally, but figuratively arm wrestling your own brain, like talking to yourself about how silly this is and how ineffective it's going to be, until you go into this really unique brainwave state where you start getting some serious meditation done and some serious thought done. But that's a great way to be alone. It's a great way to be alone. Some people do morning meditations alone. But if you're anything like I was when I started to try to meditate, I just couldn't get into it. My mind thinks too quickly. It was too slow, and I needed to have training wheels to do it. And that's kind of what a float tank or a sensory deprivation tank is. It's like training wheels to be able to meditate effectively. Okay. So Jesse's asking, is the inability to express, show, understand love in any way related to addictions, disorders, or disorders that you previously spoke of? Yeah, all of them. Love is the number one ingredient. And if we're calling it a soup, in the soup of healing, love is the number one ingredient, which is why I'm dedicating an entire show to it. So absolutely. It can affect any disease, can affect any illness, can trigger addictions, can trigger all kinds of health issues. Okay. If I'm gluten intolerant, can I eat it in a flour form? No. If you're gluten intolerant, you're gluten intolerant. Flour form, milled form, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether it's organic. Doesn't matter whether it's sprouted. If it's gluten, and your body's going to react to it. Let's see here. Yeah, somebody chimed in, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Yeah, that's the book I was referring to. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, it's definitely worth a read. Okay. Yeah, I wish I had one of those float tanks in my basement. Somebody says, yeah, they're pretty nice. Let's see. I'm struggling with my new diet, and I feel hungry in a couple hours after I eat. So one of the things that you should understand is that hunger, so I'm running out of room on the board here. I want you to write this down. It is okay to be hungry. This is kind of one of the things that people forget. We've been, again, in our culture, in our society, people talk about 3 square meals a day, eating 6 small meals a day, making sure you don't miss a meal. Breakfast is the most important meal. Like all the cliche things that we hear, but it's okay to be hungry. Think of it like this. So all of your emotions and all of your experiences are on a polar spectrum of things, right? And so what's the opposite of hunger? It's fullness, right? And so where most people stay is they stay full. They eat a lot at a meal, and then they really never experience hunger, and then it's already time to eat again. And so they're going from one meal to the next meal to the next meal, never even understanding what it feels like to be hungry. So they don't even know what true hunger is. And that's so true in our industrialized nation, not even experiencing hunger. This is, one of the things that fasting can be so helpful for, experiencing fasting and understanding that it's okay to be hungry. You're not going to starve to death in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. You're not going to starve to death in 5 days, most of you. So it's okay to be hungry. Don't let diet change and the hunger that you might experience detract you from experiencing or going through diet change, because experiencing hunger is a very important part of healing, and it's a very important part of what you should experience on a regular daily basis. Okay. Let's see here. Tiffany wants to know, do you think zinc shock therapy, zinc sulfate every 3 hours at the first signs of flu or cold as a preventative is safe and effective? Well, I don't think it's dangerous, but I don't think it's as effective. I think, I talked about this last couple of weeks. So actually, we did a video, and maybe we can post the link up to that. But it was like at 17 or 19 minutes into the video, I talked about the most effective strategy for supplementation for colds and flus. First sign of colds and flu, vitamin A, vitamin D are probably more critical than anything else, in vitamin C, like A, C, and D, those three. And is zinc helpful too? Absolutely it is. Zinc is a very important immune regulator. But if I were going to pick a therapy, if I could only pick a handful of things, I would pick A, D, and C as my top three agents. Okay. I like that. So Ernie's just sharing that he bakes grain-free cookies and other treats and gives them to non-gluten-free friends and family. They like it. Some of them like it better than the wheat-based cookies and snacks. Yeah, I mean, that's something I love that idea, and I think that's something that maybe you should all do to get people more on board with kind of how you eat, and that, because a lot of times when you bring the food to the party, people look at you like it's going to be gross, and they don't even try it. They won't even give it the time of day. I love that. Matthew says float tanks are awesome. Help me so much. Yeah, float tanks are. They're great. Let's see here. What if you never feel hungry? Is that a sign of something? I mean, it depends, Paul. That's a pretty big question. It depends. I need to know more about your daily diet, what you eat, how long you wait until you eat, if you're doing any kind of fasting, etc. There are a lot of variations of that to that question that we could go into. It's Freddie says sweet potatoes are love. It's gluten-free. It's nightshade. It's not a nightshade like potatoes. It fills you up. Do I agree? Yeah, I think sweet potatoes are a great source of energy, a great source of fiber, great source of carbohydrate, great source of nutrients, great source of vitamin C. A lot of value to a sweet potato. A lot of carotenoids in sweet potatoes too. How, in few words full of love, do you think is it possible to convince someone about the health issues that eating grain causes? I know so much bread hooked people that I would like to help. I think in as few words possible, if you're trying to convince people that grain is detrimental to their health, the best thing you can do is give them a copy of No Grain, No Pain. Because there's no few quantity of words. A person has to be submerged into the information, because what most people do when they hear that is they think, oh, gluten-free, that's just a fad, and they completely dismiss it. And you're not, it's going to be really, really hard to convince them. A lot of people, if you're trying to convince them, I've done a couple of videos on the detriment of grain, and if you want to look those up, we've done a number of videos that are 7 to 10 minutes long, that talk about some of the fundamental detriments of grain. For example, grain contains gluten, it contains lectins, it contains molds, it contains mycotoxins, it contains an omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid ratio that's very poor. It contains such a high level of carbohydrates that can create a carbohydrate toxicity issue. And grain contains a number of proteins like serpinins and amylase trypsin inhibitors that shut down digestion. Like, if we really want to just say it fast, we could say all those things. Low white cell count. What does a low white cell count mean when I'm eating the best I can? It means your immune system's struggling, Carol, most likely. And that would depend on is it total white count? Is it neutrophils? Is it lymphocytes? Which white cell? There's 5 different classes of white blood cells that generally are tested for on a complete blood count and differential. So kind of depend. It could mean that you're anemic. It could mean that you're vitamin B12 deficient. It could mean that you're still eating foods that you're allergic to. It could mean that you have a chronic infection that hasn't been dealt with. I mean, there's a number of varying things that could mean. Okay. What are the benefits of a flood tank? I don't know, Sandy, you mean a float tank? The float tank itself, the benefits help to shut down. If you're hyper stressed, it helps to slow down cortisol production, and so it helps to bring cortisol production back into balance, which is very important. Cortisol is our stress hormone, It also helps to bring down adrenaline and noradrenaline. So if you're in a chronic state of fight or flight, kind of helps calm and relax you. So those are a couple of really great advantages of doing floating. Okay, it looks like we just ran out of time. We still got questions coming in. So look, tune in next week. We're going to be back next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Make sure you don't miss a show. Put it on your calendar. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. And then once you do that, hit the little bell icon. That'll make sure you get notifications when I go live. Sometimes the emails don't get to you in time. Sometimes the emails get filtered. The powers that be don't like the information we're talking about. We kind of get blocked on a regular basis. So if you want to ensure that you get our message, make sure you subscribe in as many ways as possible. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our Facebook channel. You can also go over to glutenfreesociety.org and subscribe to our newsletter. It's the world's #1 newsletter for gluten sensitivity. So if you want to learn more about the gluten-free, grain-free diet and no grain, no pain program, you can check us out again at glutenfreesociety.org. This is Dr. Osborne saying I love you all and wish you the most wonderful Valentine's Day that you could have. And we'll see you back here next week, same time. Take care. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live. But it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.